How to transplant orchids. Orchids are plants that produce beautiful and unique flowers. When you're growing orchids, it's important to repot them now and then. However, repotting is stressful for plants, so it's also important that you only do this when it is absolutely necessary and that you're very careful throughout the process. But a successful repotting will extend the life of your orchids, so you should do it regularly as the plants grow. Organizing your transplant. Pick the right time. Orchids need to be transplanted every 1 to 2 years as their growing medium breaks down and loses nutrients. For most orchids, spring is the ideal time for transplantation, but there are also other factors to consider. An orchid should be transplanted after the plant has bloomed and is growing new roots or leaves. When the roots and plants start to overgrow the current pot. When it's not currently flowering or forming new flowers. If the pot breaks. If the plant becomes infested with bugs. If growing medium is wet and not draining properly. Select a suitable pot. Pot choice for orchids is important, and this includes the size and the style. Transplanting an orchid into a pot that's too large will force the plant to focus on root growth rather than flowering. Also, for an orchid to survive, it has to be placed in a pot with drainage holes. Pick a pot that will allow for 1 to 2 years of growth, but nothing larger than that. If you're not sure about how much growth there will be, opt for a pot that's just one size larger than the current one, too. You can use plastic or terracotta pots for orchids. Terracotta pots require more frequent watering. Use pots with holes in the sides so there's lots of airflow. Opt for a shallow pot versus a deep one to prevent water buildup. Choose the right growing medium. Most orchids don't grow in the ground like other plants, but instead grow on trees. Because of this, many orchids cannot grow in regular potting soil, and instead need a very loose soil that's amended with chunks of bark and other organic matter. Popular mediums for orchids include coconut husk, sphagnum moss, perlite, fir bark, and mixtures of these. Water the orchid. Before transplanting your orchid, give it some water 3 days prior to help reduce the shock of transplanting. Don't give it more water than usual, however. Instead, give it enough to moisten the growing medium it's currently in. Remember to fertilize your orchid once per week with a week 20-20-20 fertilizer solution. 5. Soak the new medium. Many orchid media are dry, and soaking the medium before transplanting will help it absorb and retain more moisture. To soak the medium, fill the new orchid pot with as much growing medium as you'll need to repot the orchid. Transfer the medium to a bucket that's about twice as large as the new pot. Fill the bucket the rest of the way with water. Let the medium soak for 1 to 2 hours. Strain the medium through a fine mesh strainer. Pour running water over the medium to remove dust. Sterilize a cutting tool. Once you remove the orchid from its current pot, you'll need a sterilized knife or scissors to trim dead roots and leaves. It's important to use a sterilized tool to prevent the spread of viruses and diseases. One way to sterilize your cutting tool is by holding it over an open flame until the metal glows red hot. 7. You can also soak the knife or scissors in a disinfectant, such as iodine or alcohol. Soak for about 20 minutes. Another way to sterilize your instrument is by boiling it in water for 20 minutes.